Welcome back. So today we're looking at running a German air lineup. So if you're familiar with my Peak Degeneracy series, one of the first videos that I put up in there was Peak Degeneracy planes, and I primarily looked at the Americans, and it's mostly because the Americans really are truly the best when it comes to planes in the game. When it comes to Germany, they have a very competitive air force, or Luftwaffe. The problem that they run into is that for the most part, their planes are somewhat specialized. If you look at the American lineups, it's very easy to make a very competitive American air lineup where you're running like six squads of planes because you can bring six fighters and all of your fighters are as good at being fighters as everybody else's fighters, but they're also as good at being cast planes as everybody else's cast planes. For example, the Corsair can bring like eight HVARs. The BF or not the BF, the P-51 can bring two 500-pound bombs. You can bring the event or the premium Hellcat, and it gets a drop tank that basically acts like napalm, and it gets like four HVARs. You can bring like a P-38 or whatever, and it has rockets. You get the idea. There are a lot of options that you have as the Americans to put into your fighter line that also are very good at killing things on the ground. Likewise, their strike line has very effective planes there too. So you can bring a P-47 and you have a 500-pound bomb and 10 HVARs, and you don't turn as well as other planes, but you still are a fighter, more or less, that has like 850 cals, so if you do get on somebody, you pretty much shred them. You get the idea. The American air lineup has a ton of versatility, regardless of whether you're playing CAS or you're playing fighters. They kind of flex into both roles, and it makes playing an air lineup, even if you only bring like three planes, much more rewarding than playing somebody else. But I wanted to see if I could pull it off with Germany, because there are some German planes that do cross over. And I didn't run the same lineup the whole time. I'm primarily just going to highlight one match today, but I did switch up my lineup a few times, and I get similar results. Um, so let's talk about some of the stuff that I did run at the various times. Now, the main staple to any German air attack lineup has to be the Ju-188. It's probably the best, like, quote unquote bomber in the game. I mean, this is actually a frontline bomber, but some of the other nations either have bombers that are kind of lightweight or they kind of lack bombers altogether. With the Ju-188, you're getting a twin-engine plane, it's got a handful of turrets on it, and you're getting six 250 kilo bombs, which in American numbers, that's like 500-ish. So the closest thing that the Americans can bring to this is the A-20, and it carries two less bombs, but it gets a bunch of front-facing 50 cals, so it's a little bit of a trade-off. In general, though, I would prefer the Ju-188. And on top of that, if you are bringing the Ju-188, it doubles as a makeshift paratrooper squad. And what I mean by that is it's a five-man air squad, so if you get shot down and you equip everybody with a submachine gun, like I gave them all the captured PPSHs, then you can drop in and you can try to position them, but jumping out is not as accurate as using a paratrooper plane, but you can try to be in the right neighborhood with them. But once you get on the ground, it's like having an assault squad, which is really nice. Moving on from there, if you want an attack plane that kind of doubles as a fighter, you've got the BF, or not the BF, the FW-190 Dora, the D-12, and it does have a crap elevator, It's just the way that Focke-Wulfs are, especially the Dora series. They just do not like to turn at all. They don't like to pull up. And so the Focke-Wulf 190 Dora in particular is a plane that I really like in other World War II games, but those are all like air sims, whether it's IL-2 or I've test flown it a bunch in DCS. I've played it a decent bit in War Thunder, with like the D9, the D12, the D13, all those, right? So it's a plane that I like. The problem is when you bring it into a casserole, it has a very difficult time getting its bombs on target and making it out alive because the elevator's really, really bad. So if you want to dive bomb, you have to pull up a lot sooner than you otherwise would, which means that your bombs are inherently going to be less accurate. That being said, it carries a phenomenal bomb load for what it is. So you're looking at one 250 kilo bomb, 450 kilo bombs, and then a mixture of 20 and 30 mil cannons. So as long as you abuse your speed, you can be a menace dealing with other planes. The problem there is that the engagements in Enlisted are in such a small area and are at such a low altitude that I don't feel like you can really take advantage of the performance of the Doras. They have tremendously powerful engines and they're very fast. It just doesn't feel like that speed really matters because it's difficult to get enough separation to actually turn around and then go after somebody. But it's probably your best bet at a P-47 for the German tech tree. Additionally to that, I ran some of the ME-410s. Depending on the match, I either ran the one with two 250 kilo bombs, or I ran the one with the four Werfergranat rockets. You can find success with both of them. I think I prefer the rockets though. Most planes that get the Werfergranats only get like one of them. So when you can bring more than one, it's truly a joy. The plane itself is more maneuverable than you might expect for its size, but less maneuverable than you'd probably like it to be. And the tail gunners are in kind of an odd position, so they're not the most reliable thing in the world. It's a decent plane though, no major complaints. The Focke-Wulf 190 Anton, the A8 in particular, is pretty decent. It's another, like, fighter-bomber kind of plane. Unfortunately, the version we get in-game only has access to the two Werfergranat rockets. In reality, they could also carry a variety of bombs, and to be honest, I would rather have the bomb options than the Werfergranats. Mostly because it only carries two of them, and they fire in pairs, so you get one shot, and now you're back to base. Still, you get 4 20 mils and 2 13 mils, so it performs decently in a fighter role, and it's actually pretty devastating if you can find people to strafe on the ground. So, it's not a bad plane. It made it into the line. Then, looking at the other fighters, the Germans, I think, play better into an air defense role. So, most of the time when you fight the Americans, they're going to bring planes out. They're not always going to be good planes. A lot of the time you're going to run into somebody in like a BR-1 plane or a BR-3 plane, but for every one of those you're going to run into somebody in a P-47. Like the P-47 is probably the most popular vehicle in the American tech tree. The amount of times that I see them, I would honestly believe that it's the most popular vehicle in the game. So, when you're playing America, if you're bringing a fighter that doesn't bring air-to-ground weapons, it feels kind of bad. When you're playing Germany, it's kind of the opposite. So, you can bring the Bf-109 G6, for example, and it's a really good, happy medium, where you've got decent speed, you've got decent turning, but you also carry 4 50-kilo bombs, and if you know where the enemy infantry are, 50-kilo bombs are plenty to deal with infantry, so it gives you a nice flex roll. But, if you're playing against the Americans a lot, and normally when I play Germany, I play against the Americans, I do play against the Russians from time to time, but it's kind of like the odd match out. So if you're going to be playing against the Americans, the G10 and the G14 are both really good. You can make an argument for the K4. To be honest, I think that the K4 has been kind of disappointing in Enlisted for me, because normally I would expect the K4 to be phenomenal. The problem is that the 30mm cannon, it's good, but I would prefer to have the option to either take the wing pods or to swap the 30mm for a 20mm and just have more ammo, just so I could either have more shots on target or to be able to engage more targets without having to rearm. And so because of that, I prefer the G14 and the G10. And as to which one of them is better, I think it's just user preference. One of them is slightly faster and the other one turns slightly better, but they both get the underwing gun pods. And so you're looking at planes that have two 13mm machine guns and three 20mm cannons, so they can pretty much shred anything that you get the tail of. I wouldn't really recommend head-oning things, but I mean, I do it more than I should, and most of the time, as long as you're accurate, you'll kill it, but you'll probably die in the process. But, like I was saying, because Germany sees so many American planes, and because the Americans so consistently bring out planes, it puts you in a position where you can reliably fly dedicated air-to-air fighters, and you can rack up a ton of points that way. Because every time somebody dies on the other team in a plane, like, this isn't every match, but in many matches, you'll run into situations where every time one P-47 goes down, the next one spawns. And because of that, you can rack up a pretty decent tally that way. Also, if they bring in bombers, bombers are just free points, so there are benefits to flying things that are not the Ju-188. But that being said, the Ju-188, if you know where enemy tanks are or enemy infantry are, is phenomenal. Like, in theory, you can take out 2 tanks and a horde of infantry in one go with the Ju-188, so it's really nothing to shrug at. As for alternatives, the G55 is a potential alternative. It carries 2 100 kilo bombs, and it's got 450 cals and a 20mm. And if you're playing at lower BR, you probably could make something like this work, but you'd have to play around the BF-110s if you're playing at BR3. If you wanted to go lower than that, there are BR1 and 2 BF-109s that have bombs on them, so they can work for the fighter role. The IAR-81 is actually pretty good, and it also can play into the fighter role. And then I think you'd have to look at things like the POTES and the Ju-87s, which they're going to do well in the ground attack role. They just don't have as much air-to-air flexibility. But depending on what you have, because if you've got the Beretta 88, for example, or if you've got the Italian fighter, I'm trying to think of what it's called. I don't think they sell it anymore. It's like a I can't think of the name. Okay, basically, I'm gonna describe it. It looks like you took like a C-202 and you scrunched it so it's shorter, and then you paint it black. Anyway, if you've got that, that's also a pretty good plane, and it's also at low BR. I just can't remember what it's called, and they don't sell it anymore, so Regardless, the Germans can make a pretty competitive air attack lineup at BR1 and 2. I didn't play it for this, and to be honest, it might feel a little bit scummier to do it because you're going to be playing against lower BR players, but it's an option. There are certainly enough Ju-87s at BR1 and 2, and there are certainly enough fighters that can carry enough ordnance for it to be competitive. And I guess if I was going to do it, then I would, assuming that you don't have the premiums like me, I would probably bring the IAR, I would probably bring the BF-109 E7U2, And then I would probably bring the BF-109 F2 for the fighters. And then for the attackers, I would probably bring the HOTES. And as to which Ju-87 you bring, well, you'd bring two of them, I think. I'd probably bring the R2 and I guess the D5. Yeah, probably the D5, because it's got the 20 mils. So, let me know what you think down below. Have you played around with German air a lot? Are you the ace of the Luftwaffe? To be honest, I found them to be different, but less competitive at this sort of lineup than the Americans. Like, I think in a normal lineup where you only bring, like, one, maybe two planes, I think the Germans are very competitive. And I think in a fighter-to-fighter role, or if you're bringing them as, like, an air defense option, I think they're very competitive. I think they're very good at killing American planes. Likewise, I think their specialized vehicles like the Ju-188 are very good at attacking enemies on the ground. The problem that I think they run into is that they don't have the flexibility that the Americans have. And the Americans' ability to bring one plane and do it all, whether you want to bring a P-47 and be more of a CAS plane, or you want to bring a Corsair and be more of an air defense plane, I just think that's unparalleled. I do think I'm going to look at this for the Russians as well, but I think the Russians are going to be less competitive in it than the Germans. Because I feel like the Russian planes are even more specialized than the German planes are. But regardless, I'll look at that in the future. As per usual, get out there, kick ass, take names, and win your games.
Unsere Jungs erobern die Position.